Okay, so tonight we're gonna do a lot of discussion about revenues. So we're gonna go over the sources. We're gonna have you be active participants in what you guys think some certain revenues will be. We're gonna talk about the tax cap and then with that, the estimated property and assessments. So we received sort of really five sources of revenue. The first being the tax levy, the second being what they call local sources. And you can see above that, there's quite a few different subcategories of that. Then we have our state aid, and then our federal aid, and then what they call interfund transfers. And finally, to help us balance the budget or subsidize the budget if need be, we can use fund balance or reserves. That's the last one, number 6. What I really wanted to share was overall, that is the subtotal general fund, the rose and green. You can see the first column, 1819 was the adopted, so that was the budget. The second column is what we actually received. So in 1819, we had budgeted for 78, we received 80. So we received 1.5 million or 1.94 more than what we had budgeted. Remember, it's out of an $80 million budget, so that's pretty tight. You can see that in the 1920 year, we had, for lack of a better term, a surplus or more revenue than what was budgeted of 836 or about 1%. The following year, 1.5, and in the following year after that, 21-22 of 1.8 or about 2.19%. I like to give a historical context, looking back 5 years and then 10 years in total. And what you can see is that there's not a lot of change as it relates to the sources of our revenue. Back in both the 17 and 12 year, and even the most recent completed fiscal year, it's about 91 to 92% of our aid comes from our property tax and our state aid sources. Any questions on sort of the breakdown of the percent? Okay, so here's sort of where we're at right now with what I've proposed thus far. And the sections in yellow are the ones that we're going to really have some discussion about and allow you to identify what you think it may be. So first, we're going to look at what they call non-property tax items. That's sales tax. Okay. The next is going to be miscellaneous, and you're going to see a little bit later on that there's quite a few things that make up that miscellaneous revenue. And we're going to talk about state aid. And ultimately, we're going to get to the real property tax levy. So those are the ones we're going to focus on. The other areas, so the 1099, the other tax items, that's the pilots. Okay, that number is for the most part set as of right now. The charges for service, the use of money, the other items on there are relatively small in nature. We're going to take a look at more of the larger aspects of the aid. So that being said, for the group leaders, if you can maybe at this point open up the shared spreadsheet. So what I've done is I've created a spreadsheet, shared it with Kristen, Lori, Corey, Ty, Jonathan, and Lynette. And they're going to enter, you're going to have a little bit of a discussion based on some information I share with you. As a group, you're going to enter in what you think you should enter for 23-24 proposed amount. So in this first example, the non-property, this is sales tax. So again, I don't have any control over that other than my own purchasing power, right? Okay. Need fuel, clothes, groceries, all of those things. You can see that over the last few years, in 1819, I budgeted 3.3. The actual came in at 3.7. In 1920, bumped it up 100 grand. 3.4 came in at 3.8. 2021, 3.4 came in at 4. Last year was a banner year. 21-22 budgeted 3.4, came in at 4.6. We're currently at 3.8. Okay. I don't know. I don't have an estimate right now of what we anticipate. So given that, just take a minute or two, based on what you're seeing here, as far as the trend line, and for the group leaders, you're going to enter a number in the non-property tax item amount. For instance, if you think it's going to stay, then keep it at 3.8. If you think it's going to go up, maybe 4 million, you would enter 4 million. So if you could just take a minute amongst your group, talk about what number you think is appropriate. Then we'll move on to the next one.
Just a word to the group leaders. Notice that there is a tab for your group at the bottom of the page.
Yeah, so I don't want Jonathan, we should not be entering these funny numbers or.
The village is showing its budget now. This
Yeah.
I know.
I'm quite sure about, been up every quarter, right? And as we do the village budget, not that it would count in this, event, but
Yeah.
90%, January is January, so. People are staying home. Even though they're coming.
So it's last year.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I would say although people.
We got about 20 seconds left.
Non-property.
What's one percentage?
Yeah.
All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hands off the keyboard. I always wanted to say that. Okay, we're going to come back and look at these at some point, all right? Because I don't want to lose track of time here. So this next section is for miscellaneous. This is a little bit more difficult to explain and to identify for you. But just, again, don't have a lot of control over these type items. So if you take a look at the bottom chart, those are the 6 categories that make up miscellaneous. So the first one, the 2701, is what they call the refund of prior year BOCES expenses. So again, we don't have much control over that. So what happens is that BOCES builds their budget. Okay, the BOCES by law are not allowed to have any type of surplus or carryover. So any surplus that they have has to be redistributed to the districts. It's based on a variety of different factors. So for instance, they may have a budget for a special education class and they charge $40,000 per student, okay? If 1 or 2 districts come in and they still have openings in that particular class, then those districts will send their students to the class. Well, they've already set the budget. So now they're getting additional income. Okay, that's an example of what may happen. Again, you don't have much control over that. So you can see historically budgeted 350,000 in 18-19, we got 615. I've bumped it up steadily over the last couple of years, and we've still come in a little bit higher than where we met. The next aspect, 2703, refund prior year expense other than transportation. So again, types of items that this would fall under that we typically allocate revenue to is what they call E-rate funding. So we spend money for technology related items, okay, that qualifies for E-rate. We work with BOCES to determine what those pieces are. And then depending upon the amount we spend, we receive a certain amount back. Okay? Another example is what we call it the RASH. So that's a health consortium, okay? Where instead of using fund balance each year to monitor the premium, the rate, the increase, what they do is they use the actual data of claims, of enrollment, and then whatever surplus is generated or have at the end of the year, that goes back to the districts. Okay, again, can't tell you how many people are going to be in that plan or unenroll from that plan. Another item would be CPSE costs. So we incur certain costs at the end of the year. We gather what those costs are. We submit that to the state. Probably 2 years later, they end up reimbursing us for the Committee of Preschool Special Education. As it relates to the 2770, again, what you're seeing a lot of there is usually a one-time adjustment from a prior year. But you're also seeing what we categorize as workers' compensation. So when someone goes out on workers' compensation, it goes through a process. At some point in time, we're making payments to that, but then we get reimbursed for those payments. So again, all of those items are really items that I really don't know what we're going to see in the following year. Okay. So I recognize it's a rather difficult task, but based on the historical data that you're seeing there and what little I've shared with you. All right, I shared a lot, but it seemed like a little. Take about 2-3 minutes. And yep.
For 2770, what happened in 1920? For that amount to
So-
come in so much?
Trying to anticipate all the questions that I may receive, which is nearly impossible. I did catch that one. That was a one-time adjustment for a Blue Cross Blue Shield liability. So we were holding a liability amount for insurance that was there for many years. Our district treasurer does a phenomenal job of looking back to seeing, okay, do we need to make adjustments? That was the year that we made the adjustment.
Okay,
The following year, we made an adjustment for HSA and FSA balance, fund balances.
Okay.
Okay,
so 60 around the norm in those two.
that's what I typically budget for. Yeah. Now you can see in 21, 22,
Right,
we
right
actually
down.
came in a little bit low.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we get rolling on this one? All right, give you about 2 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Just roll dice. Okay, so we are discussing miscellaneous.
Except for the last They'll say it's a year.
In my head,
Right.
You know, based on historical data. So last year. the difference was quite a bit between-
Even more so. the year before.
Right.
So we see that
They should
trend.
have heard, yeah. Heard or had been a lot of, I don't know. Does anyone have any?
I don't know, maybe split the difference between the line.
Yeah. Yeah. 8:15.
Basically go between the 6, 7,
Yeah,
7,
yeah.
and
And
9.
Sorry,
I'll come.
Yeah.
Seems like reasonable. They can use the word assumption.
Well, they're good. Yeah, okay.
It's expensive.
You know, all we're able to do is basically look at the data and you're trying to pick up anomalies like you did and the answers to it. And
And we're actually.
I'm ready for that.
I guess I have some more.
I don't respond to it, because I'm not ignoring it. I guess I am, but I'm actually.
Talk about that. We did.
That's allowed.
We're still doing that. You know, some people sure go to when it's slow.
No, that's where. No, there's also now.
You were supposed to get a snowstorm.
Well.
Yeah, I have 75 students coming up for the program on Sunday, Monday. Your numbers in New York.
10, 9, 8,
They'll get
7,
warm weather.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Okay, state aid. Here's the big numbers. So again, just wanted to share with you historically where we've come in. The first column is the governor's proposed budget, which is what we're at right now, the states we're at right now. Then what we've actually proposed, and then what they call the output report. Now, that number may be a little bit different than what's in our financials, because what happens is, you know, as we submit our financials, it may take 1.5 years, 2 years before they go back and evaluate information. We may get what they call a state aid deduct at one point where they overpaid us, or vice versa. But you can see that we're pretty darn close in our projections. In 18-19, less than 0.5% from what we had actually budgeted, the positive. Same thing in 19-20. In 2021, we were actually below what we had. So again, I know we're looking at this in isolation as you do this, but remember, big picture, I may be over in one area, but if I'm under in another, I need to be able to balance out, right? Because that's what we're tying to the expense. Follow that through 21-22 again. We were a little bit below what we had projected. And for the 22-23, this is what's projected right now based on what they call the state aid output reports. And we're to the good. Okay. So now we're going to go, and the ones highlighted, so we're going to look at transportation aid, BOCES aid, and then public and private excess cost aid. The other aids are pretty well set. So again, I alluded to this at our last meeting, foundation aid. That's the full, what they call the full phase in. We're going to receive about $4 million. The urban suburban aid has a multitude of calculations, taking information from the Rochester City School District. So we're sort of set at that number. The instructional material aids, again, are based on enrollment. So I will keep those at whatever the proposal is. So we're going to work on the other one. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about how these are determined. So transportation aid, the formula is, it's the approved transportation expense. So some expenses within transportation are not allowable. So you take the approved transportation expense, you multiply that times the selected aid ratio. So all of the different ratios that we spoke about at the last meeting, you take the higher of those 3 different ratios. Okay, that's how you get your aid. Now remember, 23-24 aid is based on 22-23 expenses. So we have not even finished 22-23 expenses, right? So historically speaking, just to give you a little context, very similar information, but in graph form. In 1920, governor's budget was 3.3. We had budgeted 3.2. We came in at 3.3. In 2021, again, 3.7. Budget 3.4. We actually got 3.1. So we came in less than what we had done. In 21, 22, similar situation. We adopted 3.2. We only came in at 3. Now, this year, we're looking a little bit better, in large part because of the changes that have occurred with the different expenses. So fuel went up. We did salary adjustments. Salaries are part of that aid calculation. So there's a multitude of different things that are happening that created that difference. So.
Go
What I
back
sh-
one, sure,
Okay.
can you go back one?
Yeah.
So how did COVID impact transportation? Because if, we're full remote spring of 2020, then we're running a hybrid schedule, 2021.
So we still pay transportation salaries,
Okay.
a lot of it. So fuel obviously
Yeah.
would go down,
Yeah.
but we still did salaries. We still did a lot of the things, incurred expenses there. And again, Ty, a lot of that too was as we were, we had a labor shortage that we could not get drivers. So we've done a lot of different things that would address bus drivers, aides, a lot of those other clerical.
There's a lot of COVID expenses too, in transportation that weren't there before.
So you're gonna have, when you go to the spreadsheet, you're gonna have a drop down and you're gonna be able to enter one of these 4 items. So in column 1, the estimate, this is the governor fund. It's based on the ST3 data that we submitted at year end. So this is what our budget is. So they assume that we're gonna spend everything that we say we're gonna, we budgeted. An estimate 2 is based on our current year expense plus any encumbrance. So an encumbrance is any amount that we set aside that we think we're gonna spend money for. Okay. For estimate 3, I've taken a 6-year average, compared budget to actual, and gotten a percentage. Those are the numbers in estimate 3. And then for estimate 4, it's based on the last completed fiscal year, again, looking at what we actually spent, percentage, what we actually spent versus what our budget was. So again, transportation aid is broken down into 2 different categories. You have the non-capital and then the capital portion. You add those, you multiply it times the aid ratio, you get the bottom number. So let's take about a minute, if you would, discuss which one of these estimates you want to use. And then from there, it's a drop down, we just select one of these. Yep, sure.
I just kind of had an overarching question. We mentioned this in our first session about the effect of inflation on all of these numbers. And should we be thinking about that as we give our number, or should we think about the dollars as consistent in your formula for high inflation?
So it's a great question. I'm processing an answer. I think that's part of what I'm doing as well. Okay, so I'm projecting what I think we're gonna spend. Okay, that will probably include the current year. It's gonna include inflationary numbers. Okay, so remember, the aid for next year is based on what we're currently spending. Okay, so inflation is already captured in a lot of these numbers. Okay. Great question. You guys think it? Couple more seconds
I
here. and we'll-
understand them better than one and two.
It may not be germane to the possible. When I look at number 3, it's based on a 6-year average. That term 6-year average is probably attention. I like that concept, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Other than that, it-
Right. Better outlook. I'm leaning towards 3. 21 point. You very decisive. Oh, I should wouldn't see you. Get to do it for.
Four columns.
Yes.
In the governor's budget is one thing to do.
Just transportation. We worked that out.
A lot, right?
All right, so remember, this is a drop-down box, so when you hover over the cell, you'll see a drop-down arrow, and it'll bring up 0 plus these numbers, so you can wrap it up in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. BOCES aid. Very similar to transportation aid. So for this, there are 3 components. You have what they call the administrative, and we'll call it the instructional service. It's the approved aidable expense times the selected BOCES aid ratio. You select the higher of those 3 different ratio calculations. Remember that it's based 23, 24 aid is based on 22, 23 expenses. So just to reiterate, we haven't fully expensed this to the budget, right? So it's forecasting. Now, the capital portion of BOCES aid is a little bit different. There's still an aidable expense, but it's usually aided in the year it was actually expensed. It's a little bit different. Historically speaking, very similar to what you saw in transportation, 1920, but governor's budget was 2.6. We adopted 2.7, and we got 2.7. 2021, again, budgeted 3, adopted at 3.2, it came in at 2.8. Going back to Ty's question, that's really an impact of COVID, right? They've essentially stopped many services. 21, 22, budgeted, or they allocated 3, proposed budget 2.8, came in at 2.9, and currently we're a little bit below where we had projected to be. So again, first column, it's the governor's run based on what they call the December database. This is information that BOCES enters based on conversations with the business officials for Monroe County. Estimate 2 is based on the February database. So what happens is we submit information, or BOCES submits information in December. That information gets updated. They run that through February. Now they've updated the numbers. Estimate 3, again, is based on spending 95% of what the anticipated expense is based on the February database. And then estimate 4 is if we're going to spend 97%. So again, take a few minutes. You're going to select one of those 4 budget amounts. And then we're going to move on.
Thanks. It's my major. My major.
And it's funny you say that, and I was going through this again. The way I'm unfortunately, that's what it's like. Analytics and aspect of it. You have as far as the basic concept.
Just to get.
I think 3 and 4 that category. That's first of all, number 2, better than number 1 is more recent.
1,
And then 3 is
Right.
uses 95% of basically that number, or 497 of that number, and kind of I would say here on cautions, so I would say 97%. I think so. I'm agreeing with you. That's how I asked you.
thank you for articulating why.
Okay. Everybody, that's a great question. And I want to clarify. So Jacob mentioned, he spoke about the special ed services that I mentioned earlier, okay? Special ed is not part of the BOCES aid. That comes out of the next section of aid that we're going to talk about in a minute. So it's a great question and great insight, Jacob, because that BOCES service that I spoke about earlier, where you maybe generating some surplus, that's not part of these numbers. So if you think that part of the BOCES service for special education is included, that may impact those numbers, it is not.
What are the things?
Oh, good lord. So, the administrative, so the board votes on it, administrative budget, that's a piece of it. So labor relations is an area. We purchase for our, financial software, or for our, what we call frontline, all of those services are there. We purchase our one-to-one laptops in many cases. through here. We do our DEI. We do a lot of the professional learning through those. Sounds like throwing.
So we're on.
Yeah, she's
I mean-
saying, we agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we think so they're all going to remember.
Our experience, auditors come in and you don't spend your money, you know what I mean? You got to ones that they are not a champion.
Right, we're a nonprofit.
And yet they're great.
We are now.
So, yeah, so they don't like. I gotta spend what you budgeted for the
This is my patient. This is individual. Coming in. Less. I want to be as much as possible. I'm more concerned with how. If it's just.
All right,
Might
10,
spend that.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna get ridiculed for this.
Put your pencils down.
Okay, moving on to public and private excess cost aid. Okay, so this one's gonna be pretty short and sweet. The governor projections, okay, is based on an estimated cost per pupil minus what they call the district threshold, which is your 3 times your average operating expense. So again, for those that were with us last time, that's one of the metrics that we use. They multiply that times what they call the excess cost equation, there's one for private and one for public. They multiply that times the FTE of the students to get the projected excess cost. Now, the way it's actually calculated is you take the annualized cost. So let me go back. In the governor's projection, notice that it's the greater of 2021 or 21-22 staff data. In other words, enrollment in 2021 and 21-22. The way it's actually calculated is they take the 23-24, the 22-23 enrollment, minus that same district threshold, times that same excess cost ratio, times an FTE. So for instance, a student may come in at the middle of, in January, their FTE is 0.5, not 1.0, to get to your excess cost aid. So when the group leaders go look at the drop down, the first line is going to be public excess cost aid. Those two numbers are at the top. So in this particular scenario, the 1.3 million is based on the governor's formula or the legislative. The district portion is based on who we currently have listed in the 22-23 programs that qualify for public. So public is BOCES 1, BOCES 2, and any in-district programs. So we have 611, 811 programs, then they qualify. Private excess costs are for those students that attend maybe Hillside, Mary Carriola, Norman Howard. Okay, so again, for the private, 470 is based on the governor's run, the district, based on who we know at this point in time are currently enrolled in their FTE using the district threshold and the cost ratio. Any questions as you discuss what numbers you want to put in here? All right, so take about a minute or so and. Yes.
It's stable, right?
Last week, we started talking about it, right? Yeah.
Feeling when they came in. Yeah.
FTE stands for full-time. So it's all driven by enrollment and enrollment and steady, but we don't have the historical data here really. do we?
Trying to remember.
Again, as you're looking at this, trying to come up with a decision, take a look, the group leaders can share, we have the data from what was the governor's run versus what the adopted was versus what we actually received. So you can begin to see sort of the variances that are being incurred. That may help.
I feel like we should go in the
discussion.
Which is.
0.62.
Yeah. So our two options. 1, 3, or 1.
By the way,
We're trying to decide between governor and district. Is that what it's at?
Yeah.
The governor is the exact same.
Yeah.
So that is exactly.
I would still lean for this one.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
And Rick, I trust.
Oh, and Rick, you're- that may be a solid thing you could have said. First.
About 20 seconds. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, at some point, we're gonna see where everybody landed.
Oh.
Well, actually, you know what? Let's quickly, Corey, can you pull up? I don't, you roll that up on here? No, okay. No, that's okay.
No, I can do it.
All right, well, while Corey does that, I'm just gonna go over some other stuff on the tax cap and we'll try to get through a lot of it. So the property tax cap, again, it's not, typically it's referred to as the 2% cap. And that's not actually, it at all. It's just one piece of it. So it started in the 12-13 fiscal year. But remember that the voters are still approving the budget or the spending plan, not the tax levy. And that's what we're going to be calculating, the tax cap. I already mentioned that it's not the 2%. I think the important thing here is if you decide to go above what they call the maximum allowable levy limit, okay, that requires a 60% supermajority. Okay, when we get into those numbers, we'll see that. You're going to see that varies by school district all over the place because of the different exclusions. So thanks for it.
Yep.
If you can click on the first tab.
Yep.
Maybe expand that a little bit. I don't see it right now. So for group 1. Now, right now, we haven't talked about the levy. So everybody's at the current year levy. But right now, group 1 is at 92.7 million. Group 2 is at 91.6. Group 3 is at 91.5. And group 4 is at 91.3. So now one, and what's the group 5? Sorry, slide over a little bit. 91.5. So not one of them matches. Interesting. Now, wait until we get to the tax one. So I'm not going to show you where I'm at yet. So Corey, can I get back to the PowerPoint here? Okay,
Not mine yet.
so I covered this information. Historically, again, I'm going to breeze through this. You can go back and look at it at your own leisure. This is so the gray bar is what we actually went out as a percentage of the levy. The yellow is what the allowable levy limit was. You can see that over the last 3 years or so, we've been right at the maximum allowable levy limit. And notice the percentages, 2.6, 2.56, a little under 3. Even before that, it was much lower. Same information, but in dollar form. Again, just showing what the levy was set at versus what we could have gone out with, and then the variance. So again, 21, 22, and through 23 are all really at the max allowable levy limit. And even with that, when you start looking at our other financial data, we're still using reserves to help subsidize our overall budget. Okay, here's the tax cap formula. Not going to go through all of it with you. Oh, unless you want me to. Please. Okay. Items that we're going to have to keep track of: tax-based growth factor, pilots, capital levy exclusion. So here's our calculation. We start with the prior year levy, 41.5. If you look at the tax-based growth factor, line item number 4, we went from 1.01 to 1.04. That thing is jumping off the charts. What's causing it? And just for reference, the average over 6 years is 1.018. What's causing it is the Amazon property. So when I reached out to the Department of Taxation and Finance, they shared that in the town of Gates alone, their physical assessment went up $82 million. 80 million of that was towards Amazon. So that's creating a huge jump in the growth. It's atypical when you look at all of the other data. You're going to see a larger exclusion amount, almost $300,000. Why? Because our buses have gone up at a much larger pace than the amount of aid that we're receiving. And if you stick around for the board meeting and you look at what happens in the future, you'll see that number jump even more. There's a plug to stay for the board meeting. Okay, so overall, our allowable levy limit is 44.6 million. That's an increased potential of 3.1 million. On top of what you guys just saw, state foundation aid alone of 4 million. Okay, so I'm going to breeze through this just for time. This is where we're currently at with our levy of 41.5 million. You're going to look at the levy raise per town, and you can see the tax rates there. If we were to go out with a maximum allowable levy limit, you're going to see what happens. So there's two things that really are impacting this. One is I've had my conversations with the town assessors, and the market is still crazy, but not as crazy as it was. But here is more typical of what I think the estimated growth will be based on those conversations. You'll notice for Gates, I put 0. The reason I did that is that Amazon increase I just shared over $80 million. That was on what they call Section 1. That was part of the assessments used to derive this information. In the next tax year, it's going to move off one section roll and go to a section roll 8. I think I mentioned that at the last meeting. The other is the equalization rate. So an equalization rate, when you have an equalization rate of 1, that means that your assessed value is the same as what they're calling the full or market value. So if you sell, if you have a $200,000 home and you go to sell it, if the equalization rate is 1 or 100%, that should sell for near its assessed value. What happens here is that houses are selling for so much more than what they're being assessed at. So now what you're seeing is town of Ogden was at 82% last year. It's now down to 69%.
Any of the municipalities think do a reassessment anytime soon, or are they all trying to wait until the market?
I think they're all waiting until next year, which is going to be another whole discussion that we'll have next year. So now, if we went out with the same levy as what we're currently at, you can see, so for instance, for the town of Ogden, they went out with a maximum allowable levy limit based on estimated data that I have here. These will most likely change as we get more into the budget process. A 10.59% increase. Whereas if you go out with 41, it's going to be 2.7. So at some point, we're going to have the discussion. Where does this group feel? Should we be below the current levy? Should we be at the current levy? Somewhere in between, or go to the maximum allowable levy? So that being said, we give you not a lot of time to discuss this. This is what would happen to the levy with a different percentage increase. Okay, so I realize this, you can't look at this in isolation, which is what we're doing, okay? But just gut instinct by table, where do you think you're most comfortable with? And then on the drop-down box on the top of the of your group tab, select which one of these you feel the community would accept. Again, I won't hold you to it. I realize we're looking at it in isolation. But it's a good little exercise to get us thinking, because we're gonna come back and visit this, obviously, as we start presenting our expenditures.
Increase in the levy. If we were to say, take 2% there, what does that translate into the average increase percentage for any individual? As far as actual taxes, is it 2% or?
We went back.
So Lori asked a good question. The 7.6%, that's about where, I think we were 7.59%. So I just went to 7.6. That's about where our maximum allowable levy limit is.
But where have we been as far as the actual levy currently?
That's hard to say, given what I was last year's data. 41.5, that's the.
Where we're trying to grow, where we're at.
Yeah.
So now we're trying to, what's a couple of increase the levy?
Right.
But I'm not understanding how much that will translate to the actual taxes.
Yeah, that's it.
Because what Rick is asking, what's the town going to accept? So I'm trying to think of this not for me. Overall for the town.
And to your point, Congressman, it's difficult because we're looking at it in isolation without seeing what the impact is on the rates and that. Let me just, so just, again, I know this is a difficult task to ask you to do, but just from a, I had an opportunity to go look at just at Ogden. So if you had a $200,000 home in Ogden, you paid $4,716.06 this year. Okay, I'm not including Star or anything like that. If you were to go out with the maximum rate, that would increase on an annual basis about $500.
That's the question.
Okay, if you go out at the minimum, in other words, we did not change it, that would equate to about $130. So obviously, you're going from anywhere from 500, from 131 to 500, it's somewhere in between. Okay. The current levy is
Does anybody know what the average?
it's 0%. So if the levy increases
The value of the houses and he's usually $200,000 figure. What's the average?
Yeah, I know. That's four
You know, all four of them. That just complicated.
Then maybe I would.
You know if they.
We could get 42. I usually don't read like the three.
Yes.
I bought my own.
Other places are. This place still is.
I'll go through this way, let you guys kind of. I heard that was. This question, for me, is it, it's just anything I pay out. My taxes, we're talking school tax, right? My school taxes are $500.
Right.
So, I mean, I would like that, if they went up to 250,
Right.
and like, it's like, just keep moving.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, but I'm a little bit different than a lot of people, too. I don't know what you guys experience in the past. I'd be comfortable. A little bit.
I think that what we go.
If we go 3%, now that 3% change, it's 275.
And by the way, let me just. The increase was some also last year. Right. And I would maybe it should have been. It's just- That's not that. It's a problem. It's a problem. I had to do it. I did it something else.
Right. If it's 3%, of the maximum, but so we're still on the conservative side. Yeah.
And going back to the politics to keep the town happy.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up. Let's just take a quick peek. All right, Group one decided to go with the same levy. Oh.
Oh.
Group one is still processing.
Yeah.
You know how to get to the. All right, so we're gonna go to group two. They're gonna go to 70. Anybody, I don't have the slide up.
We went with 3%.
3%.
3%.
Okay, so, all right, 3%. Yeah, okay. Group three. Mr. Zinkowicz, 44,655 is going to the maximum allowable levy limit. They must know something we don't. Group four, another 42,755, so 3%. And group one came in at 43,500 is 5%.
Okay.
All right. Anybody want to see what I put in? Drum roll, please. Lynette, drum roll.
5.
Okay. Oh, you're making me nervous. Okay. Okay, so right now, where we're at from a budget perspective, we need 41,000 or 41,936,000 to balance our budget. Okay, very preliminary. Okay, we're in the very early stages of that. I went to 4.2. Now, I will share with you, that's a number that I definitely feel I would like to reduce. I kept the other one at 677. And then below, I'm at 43,040. Oh, look at group three.
Oh.
Ty, did you peek at my numbers? So again, that's where I came in with. So we'll review this again next week when we start talking about the expenditures, and I have an opportunity to just talk about this, and I think cabinet will have a great discussion piece. So I'm going to give you a little bit of homework here. So that is, you really think about what the community will accept. I know you've done that, but I think we're going to allow for a little bit more time. Again, a plug to stick around for the board meeting, because at the board meeting, we're going to look at a little bit of a long-range financial plan and a scenario of what happens by selecting different choices of the levy. But we'll bring that forward to you at our next meeting so you can see the impact that has. Okay, so again, really think about what you think the community will accept. And I think you get a better picture once we start putting the budget numbers together. So gonna get you out of here a little bit later than in the last two meetings, but earlier than 7. So any questions before we get out of here? None.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, very good. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.